When I arrived at my in-laws' house for my birthday, my father said right at the table, "He's been a disappointment to me since he was born. If my wife hadn't begged me, I would have put him in the army. Maybe they would have gotten a kick out of him." Mom nodded, and my sister snorted. "He'd have fallen down on the first day and roared like a baby." Everyone laughed. I only smiled. And last night they stood under my balcony, yelling and begging to be let in. Their faces on camera are unforgettable. I turned 31 last month. Not exactly a milestone, right? Just one more candle, one more reminder that I'm closer to needing back support than nightlife. Still, my mom wouldn't stop texting. "Family is everything," she said. "We haven't seen you in so long," she wrote again and again. I almost laughed. She should forward those messages to my therapist. He'd love the irony. I guess I should back up a bit. My relationship with my family is, well, let's just call it complicated, the way you might describe a house fire as a bit warm. My dad, Ron, has always been the type to believe insults build character. Too bad the character they built was anxious, emotionally exhausted, and permanently waiting for the next punchline at my expense. My mom, Denise, is more of a background character, watching, nodding, rarely intervening. And my sister, Haley? She was practically born with a gold medal around her neck for, most likely to make the rest of us feel like sh*t. I hadn't been back home in almost 9 months. Not since last Christmas, when Dad spent most of dinner telling everyone how I wasted my brain on tech nonsense instead of doing real work. I stopped defending myself years ago. You can only explain your life to people who already decided how the story ends so many times before it gets pointless. Still, there I was on a Thursday night driving the 2 hours back to my hometown. I had some true crime podcast playing in the background, maybe as a subconscious warm-up for the emotional crime scene I was about to walk into. The house looked the same. Same chipped paint on the garage door. Same half-dead lawn gnome slumped in the garden like it had given up decades ago. Same feeling in my stomach when I pulled up and parked on the street because Dad still hates anyone using the driveway. Oil spots he used to growl like it was a personal betrayal. Mom greeted me at the door like I'd just returned from a war zone. Hugs, too many questions, that overly bright smile that says, "We're pretending everything's normal, okay?" Dad didn't even turn his head away from the TV. Just gave a grunt in my general direction. Some things never change. Haley was, of course, late. She always is. The center of the universe runs on her own clock. Dinner was Mom's lasagna, one of the only reasons I ever voluntarily came home. We sat at the same wobbly dining table Dad refused to fix because it's only a problem if you lean on it, and launched into the usual performance. First act, Haley's kids are geniuses. One reads above grade level, the other apparently cured cancer in daycare. Second act, neighborhood gossip about people I vaguely remembered, if at all. I mostly just nodded along, focusing on the lasagna and trying not to count the minutes. Then Mom disappeared for a second and came back with a cake. Store-bought. 1 candle. "Happy birthday, Aaron," she said like she hadn't ignored it for years. I blinked. They remembered? That was the first surprise. The second came right after. Dad actually looked me in the eye for the first time that night. He raised his beer and said to Aaron, "Born a letdown and stayed consistent ever since." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Not out of shock. I laughed because, for the first time in 31 years, I didn't feel that immediate sting in my chest. I didn't feel the need to explain, to defend, to prove him wrong. I just felt tired. And free. Haley snorted. "Let's be honest," she added, "if Dad had sent you to the army like he wanted, you'd have cried on day 1 and begged to come home." Everyone laughed. Mom gave her usual nervous chuckle, the one she uses when Dad crosses a line but she's too scared to say anything. It was the same script, the same cast, the same audience. Only this time something in me had shifted. I just smiled. Not the forced smile I usually wear, the one that tries to pass off emotional trauma as awkward tolerance. A real smile. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't give a damn what any of them thought anymore. I ate the cake. I listened to their stories. I thanked my mom like a polite guest. And I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, no shame. Just peace. The kind of calm that only comes after the storm has ripped everything down and there's nothing left to destroy. On the drive back, I called my best friend Marcus. Told him everything. He swore loudly, called my dad things that aren't fit for print, and offered to drive over and personally slap some sense into them. I laughed. Not bitterly, just honestly. He asked me if I was okay or if I was spiraling. I told him I felt better than I had in years. And weirdly, I meant it. See, the truth is I'm doing fine. Better than fine. I've got my own apartment. I've got a stable income. I've got friends who actually value me for who I am, not who they wish I'd become. But my family still sees the same scared little kid who cried when he dropped a baseball and got teased by the neighborhood boys. They don't see the man who's built a life from scratch. They never did. The next morning, I got a message from Mom. It was so nice seeing you. Thanks for coming. Love you. Nothing about Dad's toast. Nothing about Haley's dig. Just like it was a normal night. I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, I simply didn't respond. And it felt like the first brick pulled out of a wall I'd been trapped behind my whole life. That was the moment everything started to change. A few days passed after the birthday dinner. Then a week. Then 2. I still hadn't replied to my mom's message. In the past, even when they hurt me, I'd always replied. Maybe not right away, but eventually. I'd say something polite, neutral, just enough to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. That we were fine? Not this time. Instead, I let the silence stretch. At first, it was kind of liberating. Then came the guilt. It creeps in like fog, doesn't it? Even when you know you're doing the right thing, some old part of you still flinches at the thought of being a bad son. But I didn't cave. Mom's texts picked up speed after the second week. First it was, "Are you okay?" Then, "Did we do something wrong?" And finally, "Please say something. We're worried." It was almost impressive how quickly she shifted from casual to desperate without acknowledging what actually happened. Dad didn't reach out, not at first. True to form, Ron only calls when something breaks, physically or metaphorically. Emotion isn't really his currency. Then came Haley. She sent me a Facebook message longer than some short stories written in her trademark tone of self-righteous concern. It boiled down to, "You're being dramatic. You're hurting Mom. You're tearing this family apart just because you didn't like a joke." I didn't respond. I didn't even open it fully, just previewed the first few lines, rolled my eyes, and muted the thread. Christmas approached. Mom called and left a voicemail. "I really hope you'll come. It won't be the same without you." I texted back, "Can't make it. Work obligations." She replied with a sad face emoji and a maybe next year. Dad didn't bother with sadness. He called, I picked up, and after a brief silence, he said, "Typical. Always putting yourself first." I muted the phone, set it on the counter, and scrolled Twitter while he vented into the void. He didn't even notice I wasn't responding until he hung up. And just like that, I realized something that left me feeling weirdly hollow. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about them, about how my absence disrupted the family performance. It was around this time I started connecting the dots financially. You remember how I mentioned that I work in tech? Well, one of the perks is knowing how to dig a little. Nothing illegal, just basic research. Public records, business filings, real estate listings. I'd heard bits and pieces over the years, refinancing the house, Haley's boutique, thriving, Dad's early retirement. But when I put it all together, the picture was a mess. Turns out they'd refinanced their house twice in the last 6 years. 2 mortgages. No savings. Dad's retirement account barely existed. Haley's Candle and Oils boutique, the one that brings light and energy to every home, was burning money faster than it was making it. The cherry on top? My parents had co-signed several loans to keep her business afloat. So while they were calling me the family failure, they were quietly bleeding out financially. It was both satisfying and heartbreaking. I remembered every time Dad had asked for a little help, $300 here for a car repair, $500 there for unexpected bills. I always sent it. I never asked for it back. It felt like a toll I had to pay just to exist in their world. Then came February. Dad called. Property taxes came in higher than I expected, he said, casual as ever. "Think you could help out?" "Just $2,000. I told him I'd check my finances and get back to him. I didn't. 3 days later, another voicemail. "Family helps each other, Aaron." I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. I saved the message and kept quiet. That's when Mom stepped in. Her message was gentler. "Your dad's too proud to admit it, but we're struggling. We'd pay you back as soon as we can. Please, honey." I wrote back, "Things are tight for me right now too. Have you asked Haley?" The silence that followed could have broken glass. 2 days went by. Then a reply, "She has the kids. We don't want to burden her." Translation, I was the designated emotional ATM. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. scrolling through public property records and drinking flat soda like some kind of emotionally repressed detective. Their taxes were unpaid. Penalties were stacking up. Foreclosure warnings were starting to show. I should have felt bad. But I didn't. Not really. In March, I got another call, this time about a late mortgage payment. Temporary cash flow issue, Dad claimed. He asked for $3,000. I said I was having money problems myself. That's when he shifted gears. You know, he said, if you're having trouble managing your money, I can help you budget. You're good with computers but not with finances. I actually laughed out loud. Here was a man, drowning in debt, asking me for money while criticizing how I manage mine. I said, thanks, Dad. I'll figure it out. And hung up. Meanwhile, Haley's business was imploding. I could tell without her saying it directly. Her social media posts went from "so grateful for another amazing week of orders" to vague quotes about storms building strength and entrepreneurship being a journey. Classic MLM death spiral. Mom started sending me job listings. Not for me to share, but for me to consider. All of them were based near their town, all paying half of what I make now. They still thought I was scraping by. They didn't know I'd quietly built a six-figure life while they mocked my computer stuff. In May, my Aunt Dad's sister called me out of nowhere. She sounded worried. Said Ron had mentioned retirement not going as planned. Asked if I'd noticed anything off. I told her everything seemed fine to me. Played dumb. A few days later, I started getting emails from Dad. Articles about filial responsibility and supporting elderly parents. Subtle as ever. By June, desperation had fully taken root. Mom called crying one night. We might lose the house. Would you consider moving back in? Help out with rent instead of wasting money on your apartment. I almost said yes. Almost. Until she added, your father always said you'd come through once you grew up enough to understand family obligations. And just like that, the guilt I'd been carrying evaporated. They weren't seeing me as their son. They were seeing me as a failed investment that might finally start paying off. That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to rescue them. I was going to take control. By July, it was clear the foundation under their lives was crumbling, and I was the only one they thought could keep it from collapsing. But I wasn't planning to throw them a rope. Not in the way they expected. See, after that call from Mom, tears, guilt trips, and veiled demands, I did what any self-respecting disappointment with a background in tech and access to public data might do. I made a few calls. I reached out to Mason, a friend of mine who works in real estate investing. I asked him, just hypothetically, what it would look like to buy a mortgage note on a property headed toward foreclosure. He laughed and said, why, whose house are you thinking of saving? I gave him my parents' zip code and told him to send over any properties flagged as pre-foreclosure. Their address was second on the list. Amount past due? Just under $20,000. I had the money. I didn't even need to think about it. Years of saving, working freelance contracts, and living below my means had quietly made me more financially stable than anyone in my family suspected. I could have just paid it off anonymously. But I didn't want to save them. I wanted the truth to finally come out, and I wanted the leverage to make sure they listened when it did. With Mason's help, we created an LLC, clean, anonymous, nothing that would link back to me on the surface. Through that entity, we made a formal offer to the mortgage company. And within 3 weeks, my parents received a letter. Their mortgage note had been sold to a new lender. Me. They didn't know it yet. The terms of their loan hadn't changed, at least not on paper. But all future correspondence, payments, and negotiations would go through this new company. I waited for the reaction like someone waiting for thunder after lightning. Sure enough, the phone rang. It was Dad. He didn't sound angry. Not yet. Just unnerved. Suspicious. This new company, they're vultures. I don't trust them. Their paperwork is confusing, he said. You're good with this stuff. Mind taking a look? I told him to email everything. He did. And as I read through their financials in my apartment that night, I realized just how bad it had gotten. They had been refinancing their home over and over, each time agreeing to worse terms. The interest rate they were locked into was borderline predatory. Late fees, balloon payments, compounding penalties, it was all there. They were underwater and sinking fast. Buried in one of the disclosures was a loan from 3 years ago, $50,000 tied to a so-called business investment, Kristen's boutique. So while they were calling my work a waste of time, they were literally gambling their retirement on overpriced candles and motivational Instagram posts. A couple of weeks later, Dad called again. This time, there was no request. Just a slow, heavy admission that they'd received a letter from the new mortgage company, my company, saying if they didn't bring the loan current within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. I don't know what to do, he said. Haley's got her hands full. We're out of options. I said nothing for a moment. Then calmly, I replied, let me come by this weekend. We'll figure it out together. He thanked me. Not with sarcasm. Not with a snide remark hidden in the gratitude. Just a plain, worn-out thanks, Aaron. That Saturday, I pulled up to the house that had been the setting for so many of my emotional bruises. The yard was overgrown. The paint on the porch was peeling. The gnome was still there, only now he looked like he might tip over at any moment. Mom greeted me like I was coming home from war again. Dad actually shook my hand, something he'd only ever done twice in my life before, once at my high school graduation and once when I loaned him $1,000 to fix his truck. We didn't sit at the wobbly dining table this time. We sat at the small kitchen table. The one tucked into the corner. The one where real conversations used to happen before everything got complicated. They laid it all out, the mortgage, the taxes, the mounting bills. Even things they'd never told me before, like medical debts Dad had kept quiet and loans they co-signed that went belly up. They were drowning and they knew it. Then Mom said something that stopped me cold. "You were right," she said softly. "About Haley's business. We should have listened to you when you said it didn't add up." I didn't respond right away. I was still processing the shock of hearing those words come out of her mouth. Then Dad, without looking at me, added, "You always were better with numbers." I just didn't want to admit it. It wasn't an apology. But it was the first crack in the stone wall. "I think I can help," I told them. "But it's complicated. You'll need to come to my apartment. There are documents. Conditions." They both nodded, relieved. They still had no idea. They thought I was offering to help them talk to the bank. They didn't know I was the bank. The following Thursday, I set up my apartment like a boardroom. I laid out the mortgage papers, payment records, a printed copy of the restructuring plan, and a folder I labeled receipts. Inside were screenshots of years of texts, voicemails saved from every time Dad had belittled me, notes I'd kept from therapy sessions where I tried to make sense of the pain they'd caused. I organized them not to throw in their face, but to remind myself this wasn't revenge. It was accountability. At 6 p.m. sharp, they arrived. Mom looked nervous. Dad looked tired. We sat down. Dad glanced at the papers. "So when's the rep from the mortgage company getting here?" I slid the LLC registration across the table. Their eyes scanned the paper, then scanned it again. Mom's mouth opened slightly. Dad blinked. I leaned forward. Calm. Controlled. "You're looking at him," I said. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever felt in that family. It was real. Weighty. Exposing. Dad stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "You bought our mortgage?" "Yes." "You manipulated this entire thing? Are you trying to humiliate us?" "No. I'm trying to give you a choice." And then, just like that, the balance of power shifted. Dad's face flushed that familiar red I remembered from every punishment, every talking to, every moment he made me feel like less than. "This is a betrayal," he said, voice rising. "Family doesn't do this." Funny how that only applies when they feel powerless. Mom didn't speak. She just kept looking at the LLC paperwork like if she stared long enough, maybe the name on it would change. Maybe this whole moment would undo itself. But it didn't. I let Dad rant. About respect, about deception, about shame. I didn't interrupt. I'd heard him talk for years. It was my turn now. When he finally sat back down, winded and red-faced, I opened the folder labeled Receipts and laid it gently on the table. Inside were transcripts, real words from real moments documented. One of them was from my 31st birthday. I read it aloud. Dad tried to laugh it off. "You're still holding on to that crap? It was a joke. You've always been too sensitive." Then Mom spoke for the first time. "It wasn't a joke," she said quietly. "It never was." I turned to her, stunned. She didn't look at me, just at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. Then I played the recording, the actual audio, from that night. Dad's voice toasting to my lifetime of disappointment. Haley's laughter. My silence. After that, there were no more jokes. Dad tried again, this time with a different tactic. "So what, this is revenge? You're going to let your parents lose their home just to prove a point?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "This is about consequences. It's about boundaries. It's about 31 years of never being heard, never being seen." Then I laid out my offer. Clear. Unshakable. 1. They would sign a written acknowledgement of the emotional harm they'd caused. 2. They would attend family therapy weekly sessions. No excuses. 3. They would take financial literacy classes beginning immediately. 4. They would never again mock or minimize my career, life choices, or values. 5. They would agree to a restructured mortgage plan, fair terms, lower interest, longer period, under the condition that all of the above were honored. If they agreed, I would help them keep the house. If not, I'd let the foreclosure proceed. For a long time, no one said anything. Then Dad called me manipulative, said I was holding their lives hostage, that I was using their pain against them. And I just looked at him and said, "That's what you've done to me my entire life." Mom started to cry. Not the attention-seeking sobs she used to lean on, but soft, slow tears that said something finally cracked inside her. She looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, "Do you hate us?" I'd been preparing for a question like this for weeks. I had all the logical, rehearsed answers in my head. But in that moment, I realized I didn't hate them. I don't, I said honestly. But I needed you to see what it felt like to be powerless. To need someone and not know if they care. To wonder if you're just a burden in their eyes. She nodded, barely. And then came the moment I never thought I'd live to see. Dad said, "I was wrong about you." He didn't cry. He didn't apologize, not directly. But he said, "I thought you were weak. I didn't understand you. And honestly, I was jealous. You built a life I can't even comprehend." For a few seconds, I didn't know how to breathe. 31 years of wanting those words, and now that they were here, they felt surreal. Mom reached for the pen. Signed first. Dad hesitated. Then signed too. I handed them a copy of the new mortgage terms. Fair rates, extended timeline, affordable payments. I told them I'd connect them with the therapy schedule and send the financial course links later that week. They both stood up. Mom hugged me again. This time, I didn't flinch. Dad offered a handshake. Then, awkwardly, a one-armed hug. It was stiff, clumsy, but it was something. They left quietly, holding the papers like a lifeline. I sat on my couch for hours afterward, mentally and emotionally drained, but strangely lighter. Not happy, not victorious, just released. At midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Haley, all caps. Paragraphs of rage. Accusations. She claimed I manipulated our elderly parents, tricked them into signing legal documents, and that she would expose me. Said she'd call a lawyer. Said I'd crossed a line. I muted the thread. Took a screenshot of her screaming outside my building door. Caught in full HD on my smart doorbell when she showed up unannounced an hour later. I sent that image to Mom and Dad with one sentence. "Your daughter is harassing me. Either this stops now or the deal is void." 10 minutes later, her husband showed up and dragged her off the property. Dad called right after. He sounded different, calmer, worn down but real. "She won't come back." "I'm sorry," he said, and for once I believed him. A week later, we had our first family therapy session over Zoom. It was awkward, painful, worth it. The therapist didn't let anyone off the hook. When Dad tried to downplay past moments, she pushed back. When Mom cried, it wasn't to avoid accountability, it was because she finally let herself feel the weight of it. I spoke. They listened. We've scheduled a second session. They've started the financial classes. Haley's still not speaking to me. That's fine. I'm not ready for her either. And me? I'm healing. Not fully. Not perfectly. But for the first time, I feel like I have a say in my own story. I'm no longer chasing their approval. I'm no longer sitting at their table hoping to be fed scraps of affection. I've built my own table. And they can pull up a chair if they're willing to respect the space I've made. Next month, I turn 32. I'm celebrating with friends. Just friends. And this time, I'll blow out the candles knowing I'm exactly where I'm meant to be.